Well, in 1767, English scientist and inventor Joseph Priestley discovered oxygen as an element. Just a few short years later, in 1772, he wrote a practical paper explaining an invention of his that would inject carbon dioxide into water to make carbonated water, which he and his friends enjoyed the taste of and thought others would too. Soon, the first soda fountains were popping up at pharmacies all over England and Western Europe. In 1783, amateur Swiss scientist Johann Schwepp developed the first commercially viable way to bottle carbonated water. He moved to London and started Schweppes, a company that is still a successful global powerhouse in the food and beverage industry today. In 1809, ginger beer, an existing drink used as a component in alcoholic mixed drinks, was carbonated and became the first flavored carbonated beverage. During the first half of the 1800s, Schweppes and other English producers dominated the market with the invention of the slightly sweet tonic water, which was especially popular in British-controlled India, where it was mixed with gin and contained the medication quinine, which protected you from malaria. In 1851, R. White's carbonated lemonade went on sale at the first World's Fair in London, finding immediate success with European consumers. Americans, on the other hand, had been used to a non-carbonated version of lemonade for quite some time already, due to the abundance of sugar and citrus crops available, especially in the South, and saw carbonated lemonade as cheap or faux, and the product was largely rejected, beginning a unique American carbonated beverage industry which would market its products as soda pop. The differing American tastes led to the creation of new sweet drinks such as root beer, birch beer, and sarsaparilla, which derives its flavor from the root of the smilax bush. A growing temperance movement in America meant that these carbonated drinks were marketed as a drink within itself rather than as a mixer, and the name soft drink began being used and was commonly served at soda fountains and pharmacies across the nation. In 1885, pharmacist Charles Alderton of Waco, Texas, developed the first branded soft drink to be sold nationwide, although it would take until 1904 for it to expand beyond just Texas. Alderton named his drink, which was a concoction of 23 unique flavors, after his neighbor, Dr. Pepper, who was one of the first people he introduced the drink to, and he quickly took a liking to it. That same year in Columbus, Georgia, ex-Confederate Colonel John Pemberton was suffering from chronic opiate addiction stemming from his wounds obtained during the Civil War. Pemberton knew he was addicted and was determined to develop a beverage that could wean himself and others like him off the debilitating drug that was morphine. He named his creation Pemberton's French wine coca nerve tonic. It was a mixture of wine, cocaine, and cola nuts for caffeine. In 1886, Atlanta, the economic engine of the state, passed prohibition legislation banning the sale of alcohol. Sensing an opportunity, Pemberton moved to Atlanta and began to refine his recipe, removing the alcoholic portion, rendering him the recipe for Coca-Cola. Pemberton began selling Coca-Cola at an existing local pharmacy, charging 5 cents per glass. The first Coca-Cola advertisement occurred the same year as an excerpt in the Atlanta Journal newspaper, and the drink began to become popular within the city. However, by 1888, Coca-Cola and its local success had not been enough to help John Pemberton kick his morphine addiction, and struggling for funds to buy more drugs, he sold the secret recipe to Atlanta pharmacy proprietor Asa Candler. Pemberton died later that year from stomach cancer while on the verge of homelessness. In 1892, Candler formally founded the Coca-Cola Company and trademarked the name. The product was an instant smash hit, and by 1895, it was being sold nationwide. By 1899, it was being exported abroad, first to Cuba, and then by 1901 to Europe. This rapid growth was due to the unique nature of how the Coca-Cola Company was structured. From the beginning, the company's business was its brand and its secret formula, aka the Coca-Cola syrup that is mixed with the carbonated water to make the drink we know, is not in the business of bottling the cola and distributing it to stores and houses. That was something that left up to independent bottlers, which could famously secure the rights to bottle Coke for just $1. Intent on making Coke an international drink for everyone, in 1903, Candler removed cocaine from the ingredient list, and by 1911, Coca-Cola was spending $1 million annually on advertising. The use of independent bottlers led to some important innovations that may have otherwise not happened, such as the Root Glass Company in Terre Haute, Indiana, coming with the coming up with the iconic Coke bottle shape in 1915, with its design to look like the cocoa bean pod that the coca comes from. Candler at this point had become an icon in the city of Atlanta and had even used his newfound wealth to construct the tallest building in the city at the time, which clocked out at 17 stories. In 1916, Candler ran and became mayor of Atlanta, which led him to step down from the Coca-Cola Company and hand control over to his children, who in turn sold their shares to a group of investors led by Atlanta business magnate Ernest Woodruff in 1919. Woodruff was an incredibly adept investor when it came to restructuring businesses, and the trust he operated would later become well known across the South as SunTrust. Woodruff incorporated Coca-Cola and began publicly selling shares to investors. Ernest Woodruff, although extremely capable in business, had a fractured relationship with his son Robert, so in an effort to mend ties, he offered to step down and appoint Robert to be president of the company in 1923. Robert would work effortlessly on expanding Coca-Cola's worldwide reach into Latin America and Asia. He personally came up with the idea of the Coca-Cola six-pack to help increase at-home sales. Coke became so ubiquitous in its heartland of the American South that all soda pops began to be referred to colloquially as Coke, regardless of brand, similar to how tissues are commonly referred to as Kleenexes today. The independent bottler system that led to Coke's rapid rise was not without its drawbacks, and conflicts began to occur between the Coca-Cola Company and the bottlers over the details of their long-term contracts, which stipulated that a bottle of Coke would be sold at the price of 5 cents without consideration of inflation. Coca-Cola could not simply raise the price of a bottle of Coke because they made the huge mistake of making the 5-cent promise a central point to all of their advertising in 1950. In 1950, 85% of all vending machines in the United States were owned and operated by the Coca-Cola Company, a business that they had gotten into over time. So technical limitations at the time for vending machines meant that they could only accept a single coin type, the nickel, which even further slowed down their transition to higher prices. One solution toyed with the idea of making 1 in every 9 bottles in the vending machine empty as a blank, meaning the buyer would have to purchase another bottle, raising the effective cost of a Coke while keeping its real price at 5 cents. In 1955, Coke began to be sold in cans. The ridiculousness of the hole that the Coca-Cola Company had dug themselves in over the commitment to the 5-cent price came to a head in 1959 when company executives approached the U.S. Treasury on creating a new coin that would be 7.5 cents. The Treasury expectedly thought this was a dumb idea and rejected the proposal. After 73 years, the company finally caved to pressures from bottlers and to raise prices and made the necessary capital improvements to update their advertising and vending machine infrastructure. During the 1970s, a partnership between the Soviet Union and Cuba now dominated the global sugar industry after a collapse of the one in the United States. Market manipulation, higher prices related to energy shortages, and inflation caused Coca-Cola and many other players in the soda pop industry to replace cane sugar with high fructose corn syrup as an ingredient. Meanwhile, Coke's main competitor, Pepsi Cola, was invented in 1893 by drugstore operator Caleb Bradham in New Bern, North Carolina. Pepsi derives its name from the word dyspepsia, which is a scientific name for indigestion, something it was marketed to treat. Unlike Coca-Cola, Pepsi bottled and distributed all of Pepsi Cola itself, something that gave them more control over the process, but also opened them up to the risks associated with having greater fixed assets. These risks were realized when Pepsi Cola entered bankruptcy in 1923 as a result of World War I and was eventually sold to Charles Guth, who was CEO of Loft Inc., which operated a series of candy stores and soda fountains in and around New York City. He wanted to replace Coca-Cola in all their fountains due to his frustration with the 5-cent price cap. He decided to create Pepsi Cola as its own separate company, which he would manage alongside his managerial duties at Loft. During the Great Depression, as Pepsi's success grew as an affordable at-home beverage and the Loft candy stores faltered, the Loft company sued Guth for failing to fulfill his duties as CEO because he was concurrently running his own business. Guth lost the case and was fined, and a new rule was established known as the Guth Rule, which stipulated that executive officers of public corporations are not allowed to simultaneously participate in their own private business activities. Following his legal battle, Guth stepped down and made Walter Mack the new president of Pepsi Cola. Mack was a political progressive and noticed that Coke ignored Black Americans in their advertisements. So in 1947, he began a campaign to promote Pepsi to the underserved demographic, which consequently caused it to explode in popularity amongst Black Americans and residents living in northern cities, especially in the Midwest, giving it the nickname the Pepsi Prairie. While Pepsi had less success trying to enter the international market, they did find regional success in predominantly Arab countries. This is because the Coca-Cola logo in Arabic, when read in a mirror, says no Muhammad, no Mecca, causing Pepsi and local alternative Mecca Cola to become more popular. Conspiracy theories surrounding the anti-Islamic natures of Coca-Cola got so rampant that in 1951, a leading Muslim cleric had to publish a fatwa, or an official religious decree, stating that Coke was not anti-Muslim and that Muslims could partake in any food or beverages not explicitly prohibited in the Quran. During the backdrop of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the rivalry between Coke and Pepsi became more pronounced, with Pepsi doubling down on its appeal to progressive and Black Americans by calling out Coke's chairman, governor of Georgia, Herman Talmadge, for being a segregationist. Coke, meanwhile, continued to use the conservative traditionalist packaging they had been using, which had become synonymous with their brand. Before being shown prominently in Coke ads, Santa Claus was not associated primarily with the color red, which is truly a testament to great marketing. Because Pepsi owned all of its bottling infrastructure, they had many more costs and thus had much lower profit margins than Coke. Therefore, to grow profit, they would have to rapidly expand. In 1964, Pepsi expanded beyond cola by purchasing Mountain Dew, which had been a popular soft drink in Appalachia, used as a mixer with whiskey, and making it into a national brand. Coca-Cola had limited brands beyond their core cola, with the Fanta Fruity line being the most notable. Fanta itself was invented by crafty Coke bottlers in Germany during World War II, who had to come up with alternatives following a ban of exports to Nazi Germany, which included the Coke syrup. In 1965, the company became PepsiCo by merging with the chip manufacturer Frito-Lay, which itself was already a conglomerate. Fritos had been invented in San Antonio as a fried corn chip in 1932 during the Depression, when spending money was scarce. 2 years later, in 1934, Herman Lay created Lay's potato chips. Both companies found quick success and decided to merge in 1961 to combine their corn and potato chip production capabilities. Pepsi's expansion did not stop there, and beginning in the 1970s, they began to buy fast food restaurant chains, including Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and KFC, in order to have national brands that would be associated with and always serve Pepsi, something similar to what Coke had achieved with its exclusive partnership with McDonald's in 1955. The plan worked somewhat, although by 1997, PepsiCo had largely spun off its restaurant business into the new entity, Yum Brands. It was the mid-1970s that the rivalry between the colas tipped into an all-out marketing war, with battles so severe that the public and media began to take acute notice. In 1975, Pepsi began the Pepsi Challenge, which was a blind taste test where consumers were to be given tastes of both Pepsi and Coke, and then had to choose which one they favored without knowing which was which. The results were surprisingly abysmal for Coke and help explain their fall in market share from 60% in 1945 to just 24% in 1985. Pepsi was outselling Coke on many fronts, with Coke relying on its partnership with McDonald's and its international sales to keep it afloat. The marketing department at Coke was convinced that their older customer base was switching over to their Diet Coke and Tab offerings, which were formulated in the 1960s as zero-calorie alternatives, and thus it was critical to secure the favor of the next generation. Therefore, in the 1980s, Coke began a series of its own blind taste tests that let consumers drink unidentified glasses of original Coke, Pepsi, and New Coke, which was a sweeter new alternative. Respondents overwhelmingly chose New Coke as their favorite of the three, to the point Coca-Cola executives considered scrapping the existing Coke flavor with New Coke altogether. This choice became necessary in 1985 when New Coke syrup went to the independent bottlers, who had refused to produce Classic Coke and New Coke simultaneously due to them already taking on additional costs of adding Cherry Coke to their lineups that same year. They pointed to Coke's own surveys as proof that Classic Coke should be discontinued cold turkey. despite PepsiCo's efforts to stage questions during Coca-Cola's New Coke press conference, mocking them. New Coke experienced strong sales throughout most of the country. There was a strong exception to this in the South. The traditional home of Coca-Cola did not take the sudden change lightly and exploded into a frenzied chaos, sending the Coca-Cola company 400,000 angry phone calls over the course of just a few months. The company set up a hotline and hired a psychologist to observe the calls being placed, who noted that many callers acted it sounded like someone who had just had a death in the family. After just 79 days of being off the shelves, the original tasting Coke returned, marketed as Coca-Cola Classic. New Coke would remain in stores, being rebranded as Coke 2 until 2002, when it was discontinued. Immediately following the return of Coke Classic, sales for Coca-Cola exploded greatly, unexpectedly, eclipsing sales of Pepsi-Cola. Executives at Pepsi were shocked, confused on why the debacle of the new Coke rollout had not led to them decisively winning the Cola Wars, and starting in the 1990s, they began to develop ever more ridiculous promotions to increase sales of Pepsi. In 1992, they released Crystal Pepsi, which was the exact same thing as regular Pepsi, minus the caramel color. It was riding on the clear craze of marketing, which sought to portray products as unadulterated and forthcoming by using less artificial colors. Part of this fad was the rise of the fruit drink Snapple, which Dr. Pepper merged with in 1998 in order to elevate themselves to the level of their rivals, Coke and Pepsi. Despite a few dedicated loyal fans, Crystal Pepsi never caught on and was discontinued, although it was brought back briefly during the 2010s after a successful campaign was launched led by a YouTube competitive eater, LA Beast. Pepsi had its own marketing embarrassment in 1996 with the launch of the promotion Pepsi Stuff, which tried to increase sales by offering consumers cheap products as rewards that they could redeem by turning in a certain number of bottle caps. The marketing campaign stupidly included a commercial showing how a Harrier jump jet could be purchased with 7 million Pepsi points. To their surprise, a 21-year-old business student named John Leonard did just that and approached PepsiCo demanding to see his military-grade aircraft. PepsiCo refused, claiming the ad was obviously a joke, and Leonard sued. The courts ultimately sided with Pepsi, setting a precedent for what companies can say in advertisements as it pertains to how an average consumer would interpret the message. In the end, Coke won the Cola Wars, beating back a challenge from Pepsi and maintaining its dominant lead in profit margin, the reason why legendary investor Warren Buffett champions them so strongly. Pepsi has continued to play a more diversified role, being heavily present with their snack food lineup.